everyone, lovely to have you with me. Thank you for joining me. It's Carol here at Aakash Journals. I promised in my last video that I would share some more of these tags, which are tags that I've made in the past but not shown on YouTube before. I've got 11 tags here. I'm going to quickly go through how I've made each of these tags because I know some of you prefer a little bit of an idea of how I've created them. But if you're not interested in me nattering away and telling you how I created these, there will be some photographs at the end of the video giving you a closer look at each of the tags. So if you prefer to just skip to that part, please go ahead. So let's get started. I'm going to start with this little one. So I'm going to take these all away, just move them off to one side. Most of the tags are backed onto a black cardstock just to make the tags look smarter. Not all of them, but some of them. I've got a bit of wired ribbon up here. I've used some art canvas here for my background and used a stencil through it to create this pattern. Then I've done some inking around the edges and I've also stitched all the way around the outside. Hole at the top for this ribbon to go through, and that's the norm on all of my tags. A little label here, which I've just cracked and broken. A little label that I created and covered over with glossy accents. To create the wreath, this is a die cut that I've got, creating all these little tiny pieces of foliage. So I die cut several different designs out and layered them all up to create a wreath. Use some dimensional foam on here so that it looks like snow, and you can see I've got some little half beads dotted all round on this wreath. A little organza bow with a couple of silver jingle bells up there, and this is a die cut which creates a label. So I die cut that, inked on it, but before I actually die cut it out, I just computer generated on the card that I die cut. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. And then these are some acrylic stars. I think they're Ranger stars. They're normally clear, but I've used a little bit of alcohol ink to colour them so that they tied in with the wreath. And then the final touch was to put a bit of that dimensional foam on here to add a bit of snow on the top. So that's that one, and that one was created in December 2015. So moving on, I've got this one. Now I created a background for this one using distress inks and then covered over the top with a piece of vellum that I sent through an embossing folder, and it's created these snowflakes on the back. And as you can see, I've stitched all the way around just on my sewing machine. This is a Ranger stamp which I cut out, and I cut the hat twice and put little foam pads behind it. If I push it to one side, I'm hoping you might be able to see, not very well, but there are a couple of little foam pads underneath that. Again, I cut out the foliage on the hat and then put 3 little half gems on top, a little bit of glitter on there, dimensionalized the bow, a couple of little black gems there, and then for the arms, which are twigs or made to look like twigs, I just used some glossy accents on there to give them a bit of strength and also to dimensionalize those. More glitter down here. I cut out the word wishes using die cuts, colorized them red using my Ranger felt tip pens, and then went over the top with glitter. I used some individual letters. I'm not sure where I got the letters from, but I've used them to cut out the word winter. And these are Ranger stickers down the bottom there. And then again, using my Big Shot machine, I die cut out some snowflakes in white cardstock, and then again went in with some glitter. And then just to hold my ribbon in place up the top here, I just used a little brad. Moving on to this one, again, hole at the top, backed onto black cardstock. The background paper is a glossy yellow, and I just created that background using some alcohol inks. The top layer I blended with distress inks, sprayed over the top to give a bit of a shimmer using Biscotti shimmer mist, and there is a bit of stenciling here, honeycomb stenciling. I hope you can pick that out. Then I just put the whole of this background piece through a Ranger die cut to cut out these holes and these diamond shapes at the bottom. To create this, it's a couple of layers of cardstock that I've just cut to the same size as this background paper here, obviously in the yellow and this shade of mustardy yellow to pick up the colour tones behind. I've used a Ranger word band here, a couple of brads on either side, and used wire to hold this word band in place. And finally, you've seen me talk about this in the previous video because I did a similar sort of design. This is a stamp, so I stamped out an image of the dragonfly onto some of this spare background cardstock that I created. Then I went over the body with glossy accents, so down here and the eyes up here, and then dimensionalized, if I hold that up, a piece of acetate. There is an image of the wings stamped onto the acetate, but it's very, very fine or light, so you probably won't pick that out. But I just very, very gently manipulated the acetate to create this dimension effect, and to manipulate the acetate I used my heat gun to warm it up and then gently squeezed it into the shape that I wanted, and then used glossy accents down the center here just to adhere it to the stamped image in the background. So these wings are, if I put my finger underneath, these wings are not attached anywhere other than down that center portion down there. So that's that one. This is quite a busy tag, but it has a lot of sentimental meaning for me. This tag represents my father. This is a photograph of him in his younger days, and as you can see, he's got his officer's uniform there because he was in the Air Force. So I used obviously this picture of him. I did a little bit of stamping over the top. I've used some remnant rubs down here. To create the background, I coloured art canvas to get this fairly neutral background because I knew it was going to be pretty detailed, this one. My father liked gardening, and I used some texture paste through a stencil here and coloured it pale green to pick up the colour of the ribbons here. I used more of the remnant rubs in the background here to create a calendar, and if I move that tag out the way, there's another one there. This is a pen nib, and my father had beautiful calligraphy, so that's why I wanted to include that on there. Use this official stamp here and cut it out, just really to mimic the fact that it was all part of the services and he was part of the Royal Air Force, so that's a crown there. There's some more remnant rubs behind this piece of film strip here, and I've used that because one of the treats that I used to have with my dad way back in the day was that if a James Bond film came out, we both love James Bond films, and we would go together and have a film night at our local cinema. So that's why I've included that in there, and obviously this little admit one ticket there. There's another pen nib here. There's a couple of little words here, family and memories, that I went over the top with some glossy accents. A couple of iridescent stars down here because he was the star of my life. A little heart here because obviously I loved my dad very much. More of this seam binding that I coloured this pale green colour to pick up this texture paste there. In terms of gardening, my father loved roses, so I used a die cut to create these little roses and these leaves. Another die cut to create some extra foliage here, and just a little brad down there. And these I coloured just with my felt tip marker pens before I rolled them up to create these roses. So quite a busy tag, I appreciate, but there are lots of sentimental memories tied into this tag for me, so very special one for me. Okay, so moving on to the next one, quite a simple tag here. Again, the black cardstock on the back, used a die cut to cut out the word life. remnant rubs here for the word wonderful. This was white cardstock, stamped this image of a flower on there and used my felt tip marker pens to colour it. There's splatters on it with black soot paint, and I've also gone round the edge with black soot and a little bit of shading around the flowers with my felt tip pens. A little tiny half gem there to pick up the colours and a remnant rub here, and then obviously colorized seam binding to pick up these colors down here, and then another one of these little tags. So this says that this was made in April 2015, and I've attached it just to the ribbon up there with a little lobster clasp. You'll see all these little paperclip coat hangers on the back, and as I explained in my last video, that's what I use to hang these little tags and store them in their storage box. So if that's of interest to you, go over and have a look at that previous video if you want to. So that's that tag. This one, very much akin to this one. This was also made in April. I was obviously torn between which of the stamps to use, so I made this one as well. This one isn't backed onto the black cardstock because I didn't think it would go with this particular tag. Again, use the same die cut down here as on this one. A couple of half pearls on this one, same as I did down there. I've used one of the Ranger phrase bands and just tied it on with a little bit of twine wrap round, stitched round the outside, and same as I did with this tag, stamped my image, did some splatters on it, went round the outside with distress ink to ink the edges, and then just went in with my Ranger pens. I believe might have been the ink pad, but I think they were my Ranger felt tip pens to colorize the image. Bit of shading all the way around, and again another one of these little tags with a lobster clasp, through some seam binding again, which I colorized, but also I managed to find a little bit of organza ribbon as well that would work with this. So those two very much the same and made at the same time. For this tag, again, I've backed it onto black cardstock, created my background using distress inks, and then went over the top with this stencil, which is a Ranger honeycomb stencil, and texture paste to create this texture up here, down the side and down the side here. The texture paste, I use my distress ink, same colour as I use for this background here, to colour my texture paste. I've used some black texture paste up here to create these numbers, and down at the bottom to create these letters, and then went in with remnant rubs here, here, down the side here for these numbers, here and here. This is a Ranger sticker for that letter B, and then for these two B's here I just did some heat embossing with some black embossing powder. Couple of cogs down here, one of these little Ranger fittings inside that cog there, and just a little purple brad inside this one. Again, I've used one of the Ranger word bands up here, just tied with some of this lovely rustic twine. And then again, another one of these little labels which said it was made in March 2015, and I've put a little key at the top there. And again, just some ribbon and twine at the top. This is ribbon and twine that I had in my stash, so I didn't need to go in and use any seam binding or colour that. So that's that one. Moving on to this one. Created a background using tissue paper, distress inks and stamping to create this lovely texture at the back. I went over the top with some treasure gold as well to highlight some of the ridges. Computer generated these labels here, or this sentiment here: old, timeless, new, express, create, original, embrace, imagination and adventure. These are letters which I had in my stash, which I just went over the top with the same distress inks that I used for my background. And then there is a clock here. This is a metal charm, which again I went over with some alcohol inks to just give it a pop of colour. And then this is one of the Ranger arrows, and this tag was made in January 2015. Some coloured seam binding using the same distress inks to give it its colour. So quite a grungy tag, this one. And then by contrast, this one is lovely and pretty and feminine. I think it was made in February, February 2015, so it would have been made for Valentine's Day. So I layered up some cardstock in the back here, so different pieces of cardstock all layered together, and then some ribbon, or some lace rather, down the back of that piece. Stitched all the way round, some more lace at the bottom here. The word adore I've stitched round at the bottom. This is a metal frame that I went over with some white, probably StazOn ink, I believe. Might have been picket fence distress ink, not sure. But anyway, definitely a metal frame that I went over with some white ink. There's a little tiny brad there and there to hold it in place. Got a couple of little silk style flowers, silk for the bottom layer, organza for the top layer, and then some little half pearls inside. There's one of these little tags that I've made saying February 2015, so I know when that was made. I've used a number brad here, which I've also put some white inside. Again, whether it was StazOn or picket fence distress ink, I can't remember. And then one of these little Ranger charms here with the word love you inside. I've backed it with a little piece of striped paper to mimic this paper here, and gone over the top with a little piece of acetate, and then just hung it from the brad. And then I created this heart by just cutting out a piece of this paper here, the striped pink and white striped paper, covered it over with some mulberry paper, and then I've got some little beads on some plastic wire here to look like stamens. And then just to make it very frou-frou and soft and feminine, I've just used some feathers behind before I glued that heart in place, and I've tucked it over the top of the frame there, and then just tucked it underneath this bottom portion down here. And then the seam binding I've just left au naturel, if you will, because it was perfect for this little tag as it was. Okay, so we're down to the final two. This one, time flies, so live, laugh, love and enjoy. So let me see if I can remember how I made this one. Obviously backed onto black cardstock. I've got a metal corner up here, which I've gone over again either with picket fence or StazOn white ink to tone it down. I think there on the back you can see it's dark brown, almost a coppery colour if it's left au naturel again. These are remnant rubs that says time flies, so I've used those on my main background, which went all the way round behind here. Some other cardstock I've obviously colorized so that it's this bluey grey colour, so probably I use something like weathered wood distress ink for that, and then sent it through an embossing folder to dry emboss it to get this raised background. And obviously I had a little bit left over, so I've used another piece down here. The main background paper is here, this little portion in here, so that's what would have been down the side here before I went over it with these remnant rubs. There's another one of these metal corners down here which has been treated to the same process as I've used up there. These I believe might have been Chit Chat stickers, the Ranger Chit Chat stickers, and I would have just used the same distress inks to blend in with the background papers that I've used. These are metal charms, again, which I've softened down using the same coloured distress inks. Not sure what these pieces are behind. They're obviously intended to look like wings. I think they were probably either die cuts of leaves or shapes that I cut out by hand. Again, colorizing them with the same colors, but going in with a hint of pink, maybe even something like seedless preserve, just to make them stand out a little bit more and to make them look like wings for this time flies sentiment that I've got going on down the side here. This is obviously a Ranger spinner that I've put on this one with a brad. Tied a little bit of thread through the top there and frayed it. And this is what that thread will have been. I've used a little piece of organza ribbon round here, which again I've obviously coloured to pick up the same colours as my background. This would have been white originally, because I rarely have other colours of this organza in my stash. I did have a little piece of coloured organza here, but that probably came from some recycled present packaging. So that's that one, and finally this one. Now, I loved creating this, took me absolutely ages to create, and the reason why is because of this. This is obviously a seahorse, as you can see, that I drew by hand and coloured. Now, I'm not an artist by any means, so just drawing this would have taken me ages to do, and then I played with either my distress inks and or my felt tip pens to colour it before I went over the top with some clear crackle paste to get this lovely crazing and to manipulate it as it dried into this kind of shape so that it was a bit more dimensionalized and not so flat. These starfish down here were silver charms that I just used alcohol inks on to get the colour, and similarly this shell and this one here I did the same, but these ceramic whereas these are metal, so obviously I got a slight variation in colour, but the same colours were used on all four of those. A little bit of die cut there, as you can see, and I've used glossy accents over the top. I've used another portion of the die cut here and another piece up here. And then this, I believe, might be one of the Ranger festive foliage die cuts. Not 100% certain of that, but I die cut that out of white cardstock and then use my distress inks to colour it and get a softer colour. You can see there's a piece of muslin behind, again, which I've coloured with my distress inks. A couple of little fish charms there. And similarly, there's a anchor here, which I've coloured again using same colours as down here, but not so much so that it looked lighter. For my background, again, I've used distress inks. Not sure which colours I've used, but I've obviously blended over the top with distress inks. A few splatters there, as you can see. I've obviously gone round the edge with a darker colour to ink the edges, make it stand out, and similarly used the same coloured ink to create my hole reinforcer up here, and then just used glossy accents to create these bubbles down the side. And then finally, to finish the whole thing off, I've used half gems hidden away in a few places. So there's one there and three down here. There's another one on this piece of die cut foliage down there. So there we go, everybody. That's my tags for this particular video. I will share a few more in another video in a couple of days. Hope you enjoy seeing these, and as I mentioned at the start of the video, if you want to see a close-up of each of these tags, hang on, stick around, and they're coming up shortly. In the meantime, I hope you're having a lovely festive season. Take care and see you all again soon. Bye-bye now. you.